So before I even get into this, I think that there'll be a few of you out there in the audience that if I do the part first where I give you advice and say, I apologize, both for this little tangent into ServiceMonster. This should really go in the ServiceMonster show, but I think it's very appropriate here. And my inability to manage expectations in relation to ServiceMonster 6 over the past 6 months. And I'll just break this down real quick. I tried something new and it did not go well. The fact of the matter is I got too many people in far too early. And it's just not a great way to go. The feedback was ginormous and I lost control of the perception. And so miscommunications happen and there are certainly a lot of frustrated people out there. The perception between expectations and reality here was not managed well, and we're going to be working to do a better job at that in the future. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ask ServiceMonster show, where you've got questions about your service business and we've got your answers. Today's question actually is no question at all. It comes from the set of circumstances that I've been dealing with over the past few months. Expectations. How exactly do you manage client expectations? Specifically, communication, accountability, and avoidance. Now, relating to your service business, you guys obviously manage a handful of expectations too. Expectations centered around pricing, cleanliness, soiling, whether or not something can get clean, how long dry times are, what it's going to look like after you leave, wicking. Like all that kind of stuff, you know, residue on the window or residue on the roof. Whatever could happen, it's kind of your job to manage your client's expectations and making sure that they're aware at each step of the way. The big point here obviously is communication. So that's rule number one. Communication from the start. Mrs. Jones, I see you got the dye spot there. I'm gonna try my best, but I'm not sure I can remove that. Is that gonna be okay? Setting those expectations properly. Communication is a really big deal. It gets in their head, you know, the difference between their expectations and reality. Now, most people don't wanna manage their expectations. They don't wanna bring them down. And sometimes as a service provider, you have to do that. You have to say, look, I'm not gonna be able to clean that couch. It's just too far gone. Being able to manage that is definitely a skill, but something that every business owner should hone and continue to learn from, such as myself. Now, communication on larger projects is essential, right? A single cleaning where you're there a day, you've got a handful of expectations to manage, and if you do that well, then you're good to go. If the project is longer, you're doing a restoration project, you're there for 3 or 4 or 5 days, you're pulling out, you know, drywall and putting all that stuff back. Like when those things happen, projects sometimes can go smooth, but inevitably something can go wrong. And as long as you're maintaining communication with your client, everything normally should be fine. Which brings us to rule number 2, mind the gap. The gap between expectation and reality. Of course, one of the clever ways to kind of deal with this is under promise and over deliver. And in some cases that works. In other cases, when you're really trying to drive that edge, especially when you're looking for consumer feedback, you really can't do that because you're not holding anything back, right? And so you're kind of running the edge in that environment. It's really up to you to kind of figure out where you're at there, but that gap is where the pain lies. That's where the customer's frustration is going to be. Think about this, teenagers, right? You stop them playing video games to take out the trash and they get pissy. Why? They're expecting to continue to play their video games and now you've stopped them from that activity they were enjoying. If you told them, look, at 9 o'clock I want you to take care of the trash, then most decent kids would be like, oh yeah, okay, no problem, because the expectation was already there, right? So managing expectations generally in life is a good principle and a good key to happiness, because a lot of our frustration and pain comes in between expectations and reality. Rule number 3, be empathetic, at least empathetic first. Here's what I mean by that. Put yourself in your customer's shoes. Where are they coming from? Even if you can't fully understand, like take real time to stop, breathe, try not to react, and just understand where they're coming from. Then you can react. Not all the time are you going to kowtow to someone else's misunderstanding, but again, it's always your fault. You are the service provider and the client is the client. And in that case, you know, when their expectations don't match reality, obviously in most cases communication has broken down. Now, there are some cases where clients just can't be satisfied, that their expectations are either too high or they're already something in the relationship that's going to cause friction in that service. And it's not altogether a bad idea to very occasionally back out, right? And especially if you both will be better served by not servicing them. And sometimes that'll happen, and you've got to recognize those situations. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself into a funk where you're trying to help them, but at the same time, no matter what you do, the gap is just too big. Their frustration's going to be too great. Now, where appropriate, obviously apologize. And if there are actually any damages, talk with the client about how you can rectify that. If the damages are just the actual friction and frustration of the expectation and reality, where there's no actual damage, it's still nice to apologize and let them know the different ways that you're going to not only solve this particular issue, but change policy to keep that from happening in the future. So wrapping up, kids, rule number 1, communication. Rule number 2, mind the gap. And rule number 3, be empathetic. Make some restitution, make some apologies, glad hand, kiss babies. It'll be all good. Until next time, subscribe to our YouTube channel, go check out the demo, give us a call.